Okay, so today's little diversion is going to be the Alamo. This is my copy is a reprint of the old SPI game. I was intrigued by the SPI game, but not willing to pay money on it at the time. I was pretty young and didn't have much money at all at that point. And I kind of felt like, well, it's an interesting idea. It's a tactical situation I'd love to see, but I can't imagine that it could be done all that well, was kind of the feeling. And, it's a hopeless cause, right? Well, eventually I managed to see the Designer Games reprint used. I think it was unpunched at the time, but the map had all these creases on it. I almost tried to lay my plexi over it, but the only piece I have is pretty scratched up. Something I pulled out of the garbage, thinking, I could try plexiglass. Yeah. This works, it's just, there's a bit of a pooch in the map, and I got my tweezers. Hopefully I'll use them instead of leaning on the map and bumping all the counters. So, obviously, situationally, the Mexicans are coming in, and they secretly pick where they're going to start. The Texans set up their artillery first. And you have those pieces. Those are in fixed locations. The actual weight of the guns, though, you get to determine where you want to put your guns. And you can put heavier weight guns in high-risk positions, say up here. But there's a real danger to that because those guns can be turned against you and blow holes through your walls. So I've tended to put lighter guns, not there, but up on the areas that I think are likely to fall, and the heavier guns on the corner emplacements where I can. I think the heaviest of all is back here. I see that as the most defended gun position outside of these, but it can still shoot over things, which these can't. They're at the level. One thing you immediately notice is, wow, look at that map. That's weird. It's an attempt to represent things in 3 dimensions. It kind of works. One of the factors is that inside is these little inside markers, which you can use to walk around inside the walls and fire out through the gun slits and stuff. I don't think I've ever seen fighting get to that level. I've seen things get overrun. Maybe I have. I don't remember. Because certainly there's a defensive advantage to being within those or within the church. But the point is, by the time that the Mexicans make it in, there are usually very few Texans left. And it's pretty much just a mop-up. So you're chasing, if you are going in there, you're chasing them into there and just finishing them off. Briefly on the units, we got 3 numbers on the units. Let me, because they don't specify them here, I got to check my rule book for this. The rules are quite short, but not very good in my opinion. They're kind of written in that the way the Ares magazine rules were written, or the Napoleon's Art of War ones. With this, oh yeah, we'll get new gamers into this. So there's a lot of bolding and stuff, and I feel like they kind of disregarded the kind of strong design principles that they normally put into their rules in order to bend them so that they could be more accessible, and it ends up being kind of a mess in this set of rules. Now, maybe the Designer Game, the Decision Games version modified those rules and broke them even worse. I don't know, though. I know that they did some editing to them, and I know these are worse than most SPI rules books that I've faced. But I suspect the original wasn't too good either, because the game was never well received, and well, maybe for good reason. Okay, so our numbers on the Mexican units, they have 1 number, and that serves as their fire combat, their melee combat, and their morale. There's a lot of men in each one of those units, but they're likely to break and run off the field and come back and stuff like that. For the Texan units, we have a number of numbers on them. Let's just pull this guy off or turn him around to see. So the top number here, the 8, that's his morale rating. And you want higher the better on all of these. The second number is his fire strength, and the third number is his melee strength, and he's actually fairly decent. But the best units they have still only have a melee of 3. So obviously the Mexicans want to close here, because that's where they get the advantage, and you can't use fire combat if you're at melee range. Now, combat's kind of interesting in this, and we'll touch on that in a moment. Well, maybe I should not try to follow the rulebook, because it's bloody annoying. You've got a basic movement combat rally system, like you do in the TSS-based games, for example. Movement is 8 movement points per unit. You've got a terrain effects chart, which is kind of interesting, and during play we may run into some interesting things here. One key point, though, is you can scale these outer walls. You can cross almost anything. They say prohibited terrain, but is that those thin red lines? No. See, I see, interior warp, impassable. Impassable is what I'm looking for here. Impassable hex sides. I don't see, oh, there they are. Okay, so these wooden walls here are impassable. You can't scale them. I don't know why. Anyway, because you'd fall over on the other end if you climbed up the wall. Okay, fair enough. So the wooden stockade is stronger than the stone wall, but whatever. Personally, I think you could climb those and be going over with a rope and come down, but it might be really difficult in this kind of situation. Okay. So those are impassable. The yellow stuff are these one-level wooden walls. Whoa, I forgot to defend that. Well, looks like the Texans are in for a treat there. I think there's going to be Mexicans in the wall right away. Well. Okay. We'll leave it like that. Oops. See, the problem is there's very few Texans. And you have to station them at the guns, or the guns are useless. And you kind of have to station some spare guys to run around and put out fires. And, well, then I saw this and said, ooh, you know, I totally forgot about that. I got this one guy here, he could do something. But we're not positioned well to deal with this, and I think the Mexicans fell into a nice little trick. And this is one of the things with the game. If you set up your Texans wrong, you can lose very quickly. And if you set up in a balanced fashion, I think the Mexicans, I mean, I tried to, but now I'm beginning to say, oh boy, I don't have enough forces to hold all of this. So there's a weak point shown, and we'll see whether they can exploit it quickly. It's very close to where the main force is coming in, though, so that's bad. All right. So most of it isn't. There's some oddness compared to the normal move fire type ACW say type game. One of the things that's really weird here, and I wish I could play it before I explained it, because I've played it before, but it's been a long, long time. So fire and melee combat is done on the same chart here. And you compare the combat of the attacker to the terrain that the defender's in, okay? And then you roll a die on this little chart. Now, what do you get here? Well, the results, a C is a counterattack. If you're in melee, the opponent has the right, he doesn't have to counterattack you. An H is a hit, and the defender makes a damage check. Now, a damage check, certain factors. Leadership is subtracted from the damage die roll. 1 is subtracted if the Mexicans have made their way in. Additions, a leader's stacked, his leadership's added to the die roll. Oh, that's for the attacking die roll. What? I don't know whether these apply to the damage check or the other thing. I think these are the damage check. If a leader is stacked, his leadership value... Oh, with the attacking unit. Yeah, okay. Any die roll modifier from the combat results table is added to the die roll. That'll be the number on here. Those are casualty checks with a modifier, essentially. If the defender is routed and disordered, he adds... If a Mexican unit is in the ZOC... you add to the Texan damage check. Doesn't matter whether he's being shot at or meleeed for the attack, if he's got a unit next to him, and if there's a unit inside the Alamo, 1 is added to the die roll. So after the Alamo is breached, and that's not the cattle pen churchyard, that's the actual Alamo. After the Alamo is breached, the Texans start suffering some additional difficulties, which is going to be why you don't want to leave something like this open. All right. Let's see, what do we have here? So now, on the damage check, let's see, we have here, if you roll less than or equal to the unit's morale, there's no effect. If you exceed the morale by 1, the unit's disordered. If you exceed the morale by 2, the unit takes a step loss, and there's steps on the other side, and is disordered. If you exceed by 3, the unit's eliminated. For Texans, it all works like that. For Mexicans, it's a little different, which is to say when a unit is actually eliminated as a Mexican unit, it gets put on the game track 2 or 3 turns ahead, depending on how badly mauled it is. And it gets marked on the casualty track, however many turns ahead it gets put on the game. Oh, I guess you can put it here instead. It gets marked on the casualty track. Those are going to be victory points. It's assumed that the Alamo will fall to this assault. There's one other little result, though, which is if a number of Mexicans die in the first 5 turns, significant enough numbers, the attack is called off. Apparently, the Mexicans were wavering on the initial assault early on anyhow. Okay. And that may be only if you haven't breached the territory. Now there's leadership and rally rules. Basically units rally automatically. Disorder becomes fine, routed becomes disorder. If you take multiple effects, they accumulate. If units rout off the map, the Texans can't leave the compound. The Mexicans can't leave the map without being eliminated. Okay, so if your only options are to retreat in those circumstances, you take an elimination. But let's see. Artillery fire on the same chart as the regular units. They just have bigger strengths in general. The Texans were loading all sorts of stuff into their guns because the artillery pieces, because they just didn't have enough shot around. So, they're throwing horseshoes and nails and stuff like that in and using them like a blunderbuss. All right, let's try not to talk too much about this. So I want to play with the 2 optional rules in here. Range effect on combat, definitely. What that says is basically things go out to 7 hexes with no problem. But each hex over 7, the unit's strength drops by 1, and you can't fire over 14 hexes. But there are exemptions. Artillery is exempted from this. There's good enough round shot to handle long-range fire, apparently. And let's see, these guys. The Kentucky and Tennessee riflemen are assumed to have the rifles that they can, fire at any range within the scope of the map and with no penalties. I'm not sure how fairly balanced that is because they would be kick-ass at long range, but those things should be slower firing at short range. So it should actually affect their melee, but well, they got their big knives and everything. Okay, and then the Texan Ferocious Counterattack. A Texan unit which is stacked with a Texan leader, and I think I got those guys here. But I'm not sure if that's just Texan units. If a Texan unit is the entire force, or if it's Texan units, because the term is used for both. And there's no clear Texan leader distinguishment, so I'm thinking it's all the blue pieces. At the moment it receives a counterattack, can go berserk. What happens is you roll the defending Texas unit to counterattack. You roll a die. If it's equal to or less than the leadership rating, a ferocious attack is done. And basically the Texan unit gets to attack 4 times. No counterattacks don't turn against them, etc. That's to, give a little bit of I don't know, the bravery and elan and magic of the moment or whatever. I don't know. Again, that's an optional rule and probably a little bit cinematic. Okay, so in order to win, well, one of the problems is the number on this track has to match or equal the casualty track number. That can't be right. Okay? These numbers are not big enough, are too big to match what you can get here. There's no modifier here. The losses that you accumulate are not going to come up to that. So what I'm thinking is probably multiply this by 10. But if you reach this on the particular turn, the battle's over and the Texans win. Now, I'm trying to see if there's any requirement. See, what bugs me is if the fort was all actually entered by that point, I'm not sure they would withdraw, but the way the rules are written, it looks like they would. And then if you win the game that way, you get to do this continued siege table as kind of an after game effect and see what happened just to make yourself happy. If Mexican withdrawal is not triggered, one of two things happens. Either the game plays itself out through 12 full game turns, and if there's still a Texan on the board when that happens, it's over and the Texans won. They clearly did something impressive. Now, I'm not sure how impressive, say, hiding in the chapel would be, because that's really perhaps the way that you do this, is that you figure out some little, way of running your piece back and forth and keeping him alive for a long time. I don't know how additionally important that would be, and it just disturbs me that that's a factor in the victory. But then on the other side, there's how many Texan victory points you get, which I believe is the casualty track number directly. One victory point for every 10 casualty tracks for the Mexicans, plus one victory point for each game turn that the game continues to play. So, for example, if the last Texan's wiped out on turn 8, that's 8 victory points plus however many Mexicans he wipes out. Well, 1/10 of that amount. And then you could compare it to this little victory point chart where it looks like you need 14. So you've got to create quite a bit of casualties as well as lasting for some time. This is not a game that is among my favorites at this point in memory, but I wanted to find something kind of short that I could play in between my Kingdom of Heaven plays, just as a little bit of a break. Had a hard time figuring something. Great Battles of American Civil War. I was thinking Wilson's Creek or something. This seemed a little bit lighter. The rules to this were a pain in the butt, though, so I don't know. I was hoping I'd be done with it already and setting up my Kingdom of Heaven game. This one is got some definite irritation in terms of the rules factor. And there's also, I don't know. I haven't played it many times. And had I gotten this when I was very, very young, it might have been more exciting to me. It's definitely kind of falls into that, I'm not sure it's worth the effort of figuring these rules out for the playthroughs of it. But we'll see how it plays out, and maybe it's of more interest to other people. I'll load this one up.